Alright, so welcome everybody to Introduction to C# and the .NET Framework in Chicago, Illinois. My name is Micah Holmes. Been in the IT field for about 17 years. 15 of those years has been as a software engineer, predominantly working with Visual Basic and C# and multiple other languages, but those have been the big two that I've touched. So the purpose of this class is to basically just teach you the fundamentals of OOP, or Object-Oriented Programming, and the .NET Framework using the C# programming language. We will have some additional purposes and objectives to the class, such as learning the fundamentals to Microsoft SQL and with C# .NET applications. The main reason for that is anytime that you're going to do any type of corporate development or business type applications, you're always going to need to connect to some form of a database, at least 90% of the time. I don't know of any applications made in current day that use flat file storage. You may encounter that with legacy systems, but 99.9% of the time, I would say at this day and age, you're probably going to be connecting to a database. So if you're not familiar with databases, no worries, we'll cover that later. But if you are, congratulations, you're one step ahead of the game. So in this session, though, we're going to be covering all this material down here. But the primary objectives of the class is going to be fundamentals of OOP, or Object-Oriented Programming. And we're going to discuss the fundamentals of C# using the .NET Framework. And hopefully by the time you get done, you'll have an advanced understanding of C# programming language and be able to actually write code in an advanced fashion. Get a basic understanding of application architecture. That's basically just a basic understanding of how to build an application and how they flow. You know, what's the best practices, business models, things like that, and be able to apply that to an actual application architecture. Just some basics on that. Research and development using .NET Framework with C#. So basically what that means is learn how to be efficient searching Google for questions that you may have when you're programming, like how do I do this, how do I do that. So we're going to do a lot of Google searching in this class. And the last, not least, is the basic understanding of Microsoft SQL. I'm not trying to make you a DBA, but you need to have the ability to understand how to make a database, how to create one from scratch, how to create stored procedures, how to create new tables, and a basic understanding of, writing queries and things of that nature. You're going to have probably a fairly decent knowledge of SQL by the end of this course. But in the eyes of a DBA, you just simply probably know the basics. But from most people's standpoint, you'll probably think that you have an advanced understanding. So it's debatable. It's really how you look at the glass, if it's half full or half empty. But for today, we're going to go ahead and talk about object-oriented programming. So what is object-oriented programming? Object-oriented programming is programming language model organized around objects rather than actions, and data rather than logic. Historically, a program has been viewed as a logical procedure that has input data, processes in it, and produces output data. So, Matt, you're the only one here currently, so let me ask you, what does that mean to you?
Well, I guess just on a basic level, that means that there are different sections of the program doing different things that are represented as actual physical objects.
Kind of, yeah. The best way I would describe, I think, what it's trying to say here is and it's not really saying it in here, but it's a basic principle of object-oriented programming, is you use an object in multiple ways. It's the concept of polymorphism, to where you create an object once and you can use it and reshape it in many ways. So there are many other different types of programming languages. Object-oriented programming is not the only type, Um, but in this case, model organized objects, I mean, I'm not really sure how to really explain that. I mean, it's really hard to explain without just writing code. But basically, the main thing you need to think of, I guess, when you the takeaway here is that you're creating an object. You know, whatever the object is, I don't know, but whatever it is, you can reshape it to into anything virtually that you want in the virtual world. You know, where there can be an integer, it's a string, yada yada yada. And if you don't know what those are, then don't worry, we'll cover them later. So now that we've went over what object-oriented programming is, let's look at some other programming languages that we're not going to be discussing that are not OOP. So procedural is derived from structured programming based on concept of modular programming or procedural call. So when I think of procedural programming, I think of Microsoft DOS or MS DOS, you know, or anything is command line, you know, or you're writing a command line. What do you think of when you think of procedural?
Oh, this is for me. Well, yeah, just having like having distinct chunks of the program to perform a task instead of just having it all condensed into one place.
Yeah, in a way.
And so that and like so you wouldn't have to write out an entire chunk of code every time you want to do something. You can have a separate section that you call to do that.
Well, that would be an object. That would be an object that you're storing to do that. Procedural is, I think, procedural programming, I think, is more along the lines of you have to write out a command. And then it goes and performs a series, or you write a series of commands or steps that it has to perform. Procedural is really common if you're doing hardware development, more commonly with like mechanical engineers. Like they do a lot of procedural type development. It's really popular with them, like especially within robotics. I remember you were talking about CMOS. CMOS does a lot of procedural. So can you speak to that a little bit?
What do you mean about what CMOS is, or what do you mean?
Yeah, like in how CMOS works, because CMOS, I believe, uses procedural.
Yeah, I'm not entirely familiar with how it's like the intricacies of it and how it's done, but it's for it's for like designing circuit
PCB boards, right? Circuitry.
Yeah.
So really simple programming, like really simple stuff, like A equals 1, B equals 2. If A equals 1 and B equals 2, what is A plus B? You know, stuff like that, I assume. And then you have like a command, some type of command representation, or like run spot run or something, who knows. Like, I haven't worked with procedural, so I'm not the best to speak about it, but it's there. I think Ruby uses procedural. I'm not sure. I know C++ uses it. Moving on. Imperative. I've never even heard of imperative, but the concept makes sense to me when it says program as statements that directly change computed state data fields. So I believe imperative is a part of OOP. So where you have a program as statements, I think you can have you have objects and you write statements that change the data field, or the data value rather. So I don't know. I'm sure somebody out there will correct me on that, on imperative. Whatever. Whatever. I just don't work with this stuff on that academic level enough to really speak to it. Functional treats compute, whatever you guys can read. Object-oriented treats data fields as objects manipulated through predefined methods only. All this came from Wiki, so I'm not sure 100% how accurate all this is as a representation. I knew Ruby was a lot of these. That was a big programming language, and so is C++, where this is seen in all these. So that's something to think about. Ruby is a high-level language, though, as opposed to C#, which is more of a low level. So meaning, if it's a higher level, it's not going to be as powerful. It's not going to have as much power as something like C# or C++ would have, where you can do a lot more. I know there's another reason behind that, but we'll get into that later. So anyway, introduction to Visual Studio. So if you don't have Visual Studio 2015 yet, we need to go ahead and get that, and that's free. So what we need to do is just simply Google download Visual Studio 2015. You can get the Express or Community Edition. They're both free. Matt, do you have these already downloaded and installed?
Well, I'm installing it right now. I downloaded it earlier today.
Okay. It takes a couple hours to install. Apparently 2017 is out now. I recommend just getting 2015 if possible. It doesn't really matter though, whatever version you're using, 2015 or 2017. I use 2015, but I have 2010 available right here too. So while we're waiting on, is that still installing for you?
Yeah.
Okay. So while we're waiting on that, we'll go ahead and go over a few of our key terminology words here. So let's go over framework first. So what is a framework? So let's see what they define framework as according to Webster. So essentially, supporting structure of a building or vehicle or object. A basic structure underlying a system concept or text. So without going into any further depth, just this basic definition, what does that mean to you?
Well, that's just the basic structure of something, and in the context of a program or something. That's kind of the outline and base that you use to build it.
So it's kind of like the blueprint?
In a way, yeah.
So let's go ahead and look at what Stack Overflow says. This is my favorite site to go to. So can someone please explain to me what framework is and why do we need framework, blah, 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 blah. By the way, my definition of framework is more or less just a large collection of libraries or functions, and among many other things, but it's mostly a collection of libraries defining functions and keywords and stuff for a programming language. But I'm sure somebody has a better answer. About today, if I could. See, somebody actually has a good answer. Technically, you don't need a framework if you're making a really, really simple site. Okay, that I did not know. I was pretty sure you always had to have a framework for a language. You just do all hard-coded HTML and some CSS. Okay, that makes sense. So technically, if you wanted to hard-code everything, I guess you could build a website with just static values or hard-coded values. Matt, you want to explain hard-coded?
I'm assuming hard-coded is just where you wouldn't use anything pre-built. So all of the functions and stuff would be, you have to program them yourself.
You mean predefined? Yeah, they actually, opposite of what you were saying, they would actually be predefined. So I'm going to load up Visual Studio real quick. and give you an example of something that's a static value. So I'm going to start a new project. We'll just do a simple class library. So I'm going to write in two values. Okay. So which one do you think is the hard-coded value and which one do you think is this, I would say, dynamic value or non-static value?
Will that be value 2 because it isn't defined?
Right. So value two is not defined. You haven't defined this value, or you haven't told it what it equals yet, or what its value is. So this value can be defined later on, or will be rather defined later on. But this value 1, has already been defined. So this is what we call a hard-coded value, because you've already predefined it, as opposed to this one where it currently has no value. So that's the difference between hard-coded values and a virtually a non-hard-coded value, or a dynamic value, however you want to refer to it. In the beginning, we'll get into more of how to make values dynamic, but that's just kind of like a basic understanding. But that still doesn't answer the question of what is a framework. So let's take a deeper dive and just kind of see what people's understanding of what a framework is, because everybody has their own opinion, their own views of what a framework is. I'm going to go back. Oh, this Google doesn't like to work sometimes. So I want to see what Wiki says. We'll just say what is a software. So in computer programming, a software framework is a abstraction in which software providing generic functionality can be selectively changed by additional user-written code, thus providing application-specific software. In other words, users can extend the framework but should not modify its code. So basically they're just giving you a base. A framework is like a base set of functions and libraries to work with that you can extend to create your own custom values. So let's look at this. So what does private mean? Matt, do you know what the difference is between private and public? Like just off the top of your head, like when I say the word private and I say public, not from a programming standpoint, but from just a generic standpoint, when I say private versus public, what do you think of when I say something is public?
Everyone has access to it.
Exactly. So if this was a public value, you could potentially have access to it throughout your entire application. So what do you think of when I say the word private? What does private mean in general, just in general terms to you?
Well, just only specific people would be able to use it.
Exactly. So in this case, when something is private, it's only accessible, in this case, in this class. This class is the only thing that has access to it. And we'll go over more about classes and stuff later. But I want you to understand what this is. So, you may be also asking, why is this lit up in blue and this is black? Well, when you use keywords in programming, such as private, for example, that's a keyword. So that's relating back to that framework or that library or collection of functions, quote unquote, because it's pretty much what a framework is, or is a collection of libraries, which a library is just a collection of functions. If that makes sense. Let me bring up Microsoft Paint. I'm sure it's not MA Paint. I'm pretty sure it's MS Paint. So let's take a look at this for a representation of what a framework is. So here's our framework. Actually, let me draw a bigger square. So you kind of get the idea. So this is our framework, okay? If we can imagine a giant box, okay? You get that?
Yeah.
Okay, so within that box, you have another box. We're going to call this box our libraries. Okay? So we have a bunch of libraries. Okay? And like I said, libraries are just a collection of functions. So if they're a collection of functions, so within a library we have a bunch of functions in, right? So we need to draw another container for our functions. So here are our functions. Okay? So now we said that our keyword is a part of a function. So that's going to be inside the function. So here's keywords. So within this keyword we have the word private. We have the word string that we know of so far. I think class. What are some other keywords that you can think of, Matt? Like static.
Integer.
We mentioned static, integer,
string.
so int. Let's say double. What else do we have? Data table.
Well, in C# is function.
Yeah, function is a keyword. Think about some other things that we have.
Byte.
Yeah, we have byte.
Char.
We have char. We have array. We have group.
Queue.
Can't remember what queue is, but yeah, I know it's a street keyword. Alright, so we'll just, that's a good enough keyword list right there. So basically the structure is, when we're thinking about a framework, okay, so we're thinking about this box right here. Go back to this pencil. So we're thinking about this box on the outside, and then inside of our box we have libraries that allow us to do additional functions, right? And then those functions have keywords inside of them to allow you to further define things or to create or customize, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, when you think of programming and classes and things of that nature, you really need to think about where am I at inside the container? What layer am I falling in? You know, when I'm building my application, what layer does it fall in? So that's a basic concept to understand, or kind of a basic takeaway. You know, think about where am I at in my application? You know, what layer am I in? I hope that makes sense. So let's go back to Google and let's really explore framework a little bit more so we can kind of really drive it home. So a framework or software is a platform for developing software applications. It provides a foundation on which software developers can build programs for a specific platform. For example, a framework may include predefined classes and functions that can be used to process input, manage hardware devices, and interact with system software. I love this definition, by the way. Before we go any further, I'm just going to go with this part right here. And let's just reiterate what we've already gone over with the framework. So it's a platform for developing software applications. Okay, it's great. So basically what you're telling me is that it's a starting point for building an application. It's kind of like, here's your plot of land to build a house. So that's your platform. And it provides a foundation on which software developers can build programs for a specific platform. Okay, so let's talk about what a platform actually is. So a platform could be like Microsoft Windows or Linux or Mac. You know, so that's like your base platform. But then inside of that platform you have sub-platforms. So you have Windows XP, Windows 98, to go backwards, Windows Vista, for those of you brave enough to actually use that operating system back in the day. More modernly, we have Windows 7 and Windows 10. Skipping Windows 8 for a reason, because nobody uses that. Apple has what? Tiger, Panther, Snow Leopard. Do you know what else they have, Matt? Besides, like, I think Snow Leopard's their last one, isn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that's their platforms, or their sub-platforms. Linux has things like Red Hat, YouTube Buoy, which I know I completely...
Ubuntu.
Yeah, I know I butchered that name. What are some other Linux? One are like Red Cherry or Blue Cherry or Black Cherry or something.
Fedora, Arch Linux. I think Puppy Linux is.
Okay.
Those are just the ones I can think of off the top of my head. There are a million different versions because it's open source.
Right. Okay, great. So now that we know that we have sub-platforms that exist within an operating system, or within a framework, I should say, there's some things that we need to know. So for Microsoft, specifically for Microsoft operating system platforms, so Windows 7 forward, because I don't deal with older technology, the primary platforms that you're going to be able to deal with are within Visual Studio. I'm going to go ahead and close this out and I'll reopen so we can go over these briefly. Now, if you don't have Visual Studio installed yet, don't worry. We'll go over this again later on. I'm just trying to kill time for you, Matt, because I know you're installing and it takes a long time.
It's almost done, so.
It's what it says, but it always takes forever. All right, so we were going to go over this later, but I think now is actually a good, appropriate time to discuss it. So we discussed framework, but we didn't discuss programming languages. So within Microsoft Windows, you have all these different frameworks that you can use. Now, certain frameworks are appropriate for certain operating systems. So Microsoft gives you the power to go all the way back to .NET 2.0. Now, those of us old enough to remember .NET 2.0, I believe this was the Windows XP time period. So if you wanted to build an application for a legacy application, for example, so if you go into consulting, you will see this a lot. It's where you're working with old legacy applications that probably are using the .NET 2.0 framework, or at least based on that. So you might have to build an application that's in 2.0 to get the data to migrate it to an updated like 4.6 or something higher. So in order to get the Windows 10, you have to go back to Windows XP. In this case, when you're dealing with legacy software, so you have to use an older framework to get the data. So that's another important thing to understand about frameworks. Frameworks are also can be dependent, generally not the case, but they can be dependent on an operating system itself. So Microsoft, for example, releases updates for each operating system, and then over time they phase out that operating system and they no longer support it. So Windows XP was recently phased out, I think about 5-10 years ago. They finally stopped supporting it. I think the last framework that they supported was 3.5. I want to say maybe it was 4. So if you're on Windows XP, believe it or not, there are a lot of systems that still use XP in the corporate world. The highest that they can go on their framework is 4.0 or 3.5. I can't remember which one it is. I'm sure somebody will correct me in the YouTube channel. So that's as high as you can go as far as updating and writing an application that can actually work with your machine. So that's another thing to understand about frameworks. There are limitations to the operating system, or quote unquote your platform. Does that make sense, Matt?
Yeah.
Okay. Generally, when you're writing an application, you always want to use the latest framework available. However, applications can take several years to develop. So I have a lot of applications that I wrote in 3.5. Can I update it? Absolutely. Sometimes you can't. So keep that in mind. So there's that. Actually, I want to go back to this again one more time. So another thing to keep in mind about platforms, or I was wanting to go with platforms, is programming languages. If you're using Linux, you are probably going to be writing code in C++. If you're using Microsoft Windows, you're probably going to be writing in Visual Basic or C#. Those are the two primary languages that Windows developers usually use. And unless you're a C++ developer, that's another common one. Not probably as common as C#. C# is probably the number one, but Visual C++, there is some Visual C++ applications out there. Generally, if you do C++, though, you're using Linux. But that's your platform. If you're using Apple, for example, none of this applies to you because the only programming language that you're probably going to be using is Objective-C or Swift. And that's if you're a mobile developer. Objective-C will, I believe, do both mobile and desktop. But I believe Swift is strictly just for iOS or mobile apps for Apple. So again, your platform can also dictate your framework, and your operating system will dictate your framework as well, and the programming languages that you have a choice to use. If you're doing web development, it's a whole nother beast in itself, because now you're talking cross-platform programming languages. And that's just well beyond this introduction course. But just know that your framework is dictated by your operating system. And then your operating system will dictate which programming languages you have available to work with. Does that make sense, Matt?
Yeah.
So ultimately, you can be limited. You will be limited based on what operating system you choose. Technically, somebody could argue that you could get virtual machine for a Mac. Yes, you can, but your Microsoft application is not going to execute in Apple. You have to run a virtual machine. You can't run an executable in Apple, or at least to the best of my knowledge, you can't. And vice versa, you can't run an Apple-based application on a PC. I mean, this is the platform. It's differences. So that was a really great first half of this. So let's read the rest of this. This streamlines the development process since programmers don't need to reinvent the wheel each time they develop a new application. Okay. What that's saying is that when you write classes and functions and stuff, over time you don't want to, you write it once so you don't have to rewrite it again. Or you go out and you use pre-existing libraries or classes that already exist so you don't have to write it all from scratch yourself. So that's what they're saying. So what the framework is giving you, again, a collection of classes and functions so you don't have to rewrite them again. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what does that mean to you? Like, what does this first paragraph about a framework mean to you?
Well, I mean, it means that basically it starts you out with kind of a standard for for the libraries and everything that you're using, so that moving forward you don't have to rewrite a lot of that.
Right. So it gives you that foundation.
Yeah, and it's there to make the process easier.
Right, and it kind of acts as like a guide as to here's what you have to work with. This is what's available. Take this, and then you can write your own applications and further extend your framework. So the next part is talking about APIs and stuff and other programming languages. I'm not going to get into that because that's just going to probably confuse you. But I will just stick to this as being a really good understanding of what a framework is. So the next thing, what is a solution? So once you get Visual Studio up, you're going to have a project or create a new project. Technically that should say create a new solution. So that's kind of a bad representation of what you're building, and I'll explain. So I'll go ahead and do another class library again, and I'll explain real quickly. So over here it says Solution Explorer. If you don't have this, it'll be like this, and you can just click it out, and you click right here, and that'll force it to stay there. I do that just because I use this a lot. You can do whatever you want. It doesn't matter. But a solution is a collection of projects. So that's why it says, when it says create a new project, I say it's kind of a bad representation. Because you're technically not creating a project. You're creating a solution. So right here we have one project, this class library 1. I can add new projects to the solution. If you look, there should be an option to add a new project. Let's see if I can get that to go. I think it's up here on this level. Oh, where is this at? Should be a new solution. Why am I not seeing this, Matt?
what?
Should be an
Uh,
option to add a new project.
um, is it in file?
Here we go. No, that's a new class. Actually, I'm going to close this out. I'm going to open up as an existing. Just so I can give you a visual, because I don't know why it's not giving me the option. So I'm going to open up this SGCC Enterprise, which is a project that we're working on, or a solution rather that we're working on, that has multiple projects. So each one of these is a project, is what I'm getting at. So what you should be able to do is come up here and add new project. See how it has the option to add a new project? You see that?
Yeah.
I don't know why it wasn't giving that option to me before. Probably because I didn't save it. I bet you that's what it was. So let me go ahead and exit back out of here. And I'll
Oh,
just
by
go
the
ahead and...
way, Visual Studio's done installing, so I'm just getting like the first time setup stuff done.
Okay, great. Okay, so first thing I want to do is... Well, I'll just wait till you get done. I'm going to go ahead and create a Windows Forms application. I'm going to do a class library. We'll go over these in just a second. I'm just going to create this real quick, just to show you that you actually can. That I'm not crazy, and I promise that you can actually add new projects. Just to prove, and I completely misspelled project. But let's see if I can rename this. There we go. Okay. So now we have our project. So currently it's not going to let me add a new project. It's not going to let me add items. I think I have to save it. I think that's the problem. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And it's going to want me to create a directory for this project, or solution rather, is technically what it is a solution. And now it's not giving me Solution Explorer. Ugh. So let me close this out. Try refreshing this. Why isn't it doing this? Okay, I'm going to close it out real quick. Actually, I'm going to try debugging, which will do nothing. Still not giving it to me. Okay. I'm going to close it out real quick, and I'm going to go right into it. So in case you're wondering where it saves projects, it saves it in your My Documents. And there should be a folder called Visual Studio in my case. So here we go.
Alright, everything's ready now.
Okay. It's still not giving me... It's still not giving me the full solution, or the ability rather to add a new project. I hate when stuff doesn't work. Ugh. We'll come back to it. So, as we've seen before though in the Solution Explorer, I had multiple solutions showing up in here, or multiple projects I mean, showing up in here. So you can normally have multiple projects. I don't know why this is not allowing me to add a new project. But whatever, we'll go over that stuff later. That's advanced development anyway. So the first thing that we need to do, I'll go ahead and exit out of here. And here's your solution, by the way. If you haven't created this yet, so let's go ahead and create one now. So here's the one I have. I'm going to go ahead and delete it now that I'm thinking about it. And we'll just start from scratch. Alright, so I'm going to create a new project. Let me know when you're there, Matt. Are you there?
No, I'm not. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to click on New Project. Actually, before we do that, let's go over some of these options real quick. So you can open an existing project. You can create a new project. You can create a new website. You can create a new team project. So a project is just simply that. It's a project or a solution. However you want to phrase it. There is a difference. We can go over that more later. A website, yes, you can build websites, but that's advanced development. And team project is exactly what it says, a team project. So that's like using Team Foundation, which I don't have. So we'll go ahead and we want to click on New Project. So let me know when you get there. And then for languages, we want the C# language. Yours may or may not have Visual Basic listed. If you did general programming, you should have all of them listed. I chose Visual Basic originally because that was the programming language I was using at the time. So that's why it's listed as my primary. But yours may have C#. So if you have like this, just expand templates, expand your other languages until you find C#. So let me know when you found it.
A Windows Forms application, right?
Actually, I think we're going to do a console application first.
Okay.
So we want to do a console application first. So let's say we're going to call this my first project. Let me know when you get that far. Are you there?
Yeah.
Okay. So then we're going to click OK. For our initial development, we're just going to start out doing, I think it's going to be best if we just start out doing a console application. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because that's really where the heart of everything is, and it's really where you start. So let's look back at our syllabus to kind of see where we're at. So we've got Visual Studio installed. We've talked a little bit about solution, project, and templates. We went over that. We went over Solution Explorer. We went over project. Oh, we haven't went over project properties. So we'll do all that stuff now. So now that we have our project here, let's go over stuff. So first thing is Solution Explorer, which we kind of went over already once. So you have properties, references, and then you have the program itself. All this stuff is going to be familiar to you later on. The more you work with it, the more it's going to make sense. So first thing, let's look at the project itself. So here's my project name. If you right click and then you choose properties, you're going to get the solution properties. So in here you can change the assembly name or the default name. I don't recommend doing that. You can define which framework you want to use. You can define the type of application you're building, whether it's a Windows application, a console application, or a class library. We're doing a console. You can define the startup object, which while we're in here, we're going to go ahead and set it to this. So if we look at it, it says my first project dot program. So if we look at our Solution Explorer, here's program. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So while we're in here, we also notice that the namespace says my first project. The namespace is the project's name. And then the class that we're in this project class. Okay?
Alright.
So that's why it says dot project. So it's referring to the namespace or the project, and then it's referring to the class, which is dot program. And that's going to be our startup object. That's the one that actually, when you start up or you start debugging where it says start, that's the first thing that's going to load. And that's what we want. So we'll go over assembly information, all this other stuff later. This is the build tab. You can kind of click around in here. And you kind of just see stuff. We have no resources currently. We have no services defined. Signing, security, publish. Takes forever to load. Code analyst takes forever to load too. So this is the main thing that we need to really be concerned with right now. Another thing you can do if you really are just really bored or you're very artistic, you can change the default icon. This is the default icon right here. You can create your own icons if you want and change the icon that this application has. That's the icon that's like listed down here and the one that's on your desktop. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so the first thing we want to do though is we're just simply going to debug or click start. I believe it's just going to open and close because we don't have anything. So go ahead and start it up. Yeah, like I thought, it's just going to open up and it's just going to close. Let's go back to our syllabus here. So that's how you debug. Or at least that's how you launch your application to start debugging. Some other things, let's go over here to the toolbox. So go ahead and click on that. And let me know when you have it up.
Well, the tabs on the side aren't showing up for me.
Okay, so if you don't have any tabs on the side, you can always go up here to View. And you can click Toolbox. And then right here where it says Auto Hide. Do you see that?
Oh, yeah.
So you can lock that over here on the side so it automatically will be there for you. And you probably want that over there. Believe it or not, you're going to use that a lot. Now you may not have all this listed like I do. Yours probably is going to be a lot less than mine. But you will have...
Yeah, mine's empty.
Do you have an all Windows forms?
What?
Where it says all Windows forms?
No.
You don't have anything?
No.
Okay, so what you can do is right click.
Is it choose items?
Yep, choose items. Basically what you can do, you want to click on the .NET Framework components and just kind of go through here and just click things that say system.windows forums. Let's start with that, like system Windows forums.
This is taking a while. It's still loading everything for me.
Yeah, it's gonna take a minute probably to load. I mean, there's tons of stuff to load. Or you can always just click reset when you're in here as well. When you get in there, and it'll automatically check the defaults for you. Let me know when you get that far. And it may not have anything loaded up for you yet because we're in a console application. We're not actually in an actual visual application, like where you can do visual development. You remember when we were talking about procedural development?
Yeah.
That's kind of what console is for the most part. It's like procedural.
Okay.
Let me know when you get that far. If you don't, it's not that big of a deal.
Well, it's not adding them for me.
That's fine. We can get back to it later. It's not gonna hinder us. What I wanted to get at though with the toolbox is that currently, because we're in a console application, we have no visual designer, so none of these controls are going to be available to us because we don't have a GUI, you know, so we can't do any kind of graphic control. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to do the infamous hello world, but we're going to start out. I'm going to show you a couple ways to write this, okay? So we're going to type the keyword string, then we're going to say value, and then we're going to hard code this to say hello world. So string is the keyword, value is our variable name, and then we're going to tell it that our variable is, the variable's value is hello world.
Okay.
We're going to put that in parentheses because parentheses is a key character, letting the application know that this is a string. Now, a string can literally be anything that you want it to be. It can be any character on your keyboard. It can be a string. Next thing that we want to do is we actually want the console to write this to the to our screen. So we're just going to simply type console dot write, or you can say write line. Either one works. I'm just going to use write, and then we want it to write our variable. So we're going to say write value. And then the next thing we need to do is we need to tell our console to wait. I believe it's console. It's either pause. Let's go down the list. Let's look for something that says it's going to tell our console to wait. It's been a while since I wrote a console application, so I might have to actually go to Google. I thought there was a wait keyword, but apparently there's not. We could probably do a sleep, but I'm not going to put it to sleep. So let's just go Google real quick. This is a part of the research and development process. So C# console. So this guy is having our current problem that we're having. So he's saying console read line. So let's try that. Now, in case you're wondering why we have this brackets here, is because it's a function. And inside this function, is a perimeter value that we can pass in. It's an optional perimeter value in this case, because right now I'm not passing in anything, but I could pass in something. So to find out what I could pass in, just simply type bracket. Oh, in this case, I'm sorry to read, there is nothing, but I know in write there is things that you can write in. So let's take a look at write. So we have options here. We have 18 different options. So you can write in a bool value, which is a true false value, a char value, which is just a character, a character array, which we'll go into those later on. We can write in a decimal value. We can write in a double value. Again, we'll go into that data type later on. A float. These are some other data types we'll go into. An integer is always a whole number. So it's like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, so on and so forth. It can never be a decimal, so it can be like 1.5 or 1.6 or something. It has to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on and so forth. A long, so an integer stops at like 2 billion and something. Does that sound right, Matt? Like an integer stops at like 2 billion, or is it 2 million?
Well, I know that's in Java, yeah, it's 2 billion. I don't know if
In
that's
.NET, it's the same
proceed.
too.
Okay.
So a long allows you to go, I think, into the trillions, something like that. It has something to do with the character limitations. An object can be virtually anything. A string is what we're passing in, so we're using that argument currently as a string. A uint is just an unassigned integer, meaning it has no value defined currently. A ulong, same thing, an unassigned integer value. If you read it, tells you what it's actually what it is. So writes the text representation of a specified 64-bit unassigned integer value to the standard output stream. So it actually tells you what it's looking for. And this, by the way, is called IntelliSense. Very helpful when you're writing code. And the power of IntelliSense, basically you don't even have to know how to write in C# or in that specific programming language, but IntelliSense will tell you how to write in that language. So that's the advantage of using Visual Studio as opposed to using some of the other IDEs for programming, which is basically just the application that you use to build applications. So on and so forth. So you kind of get the idea. We're using a string. So I'm going to fix this back to the way we had it. And what I'm doing with this, with the semicolon, is I'm telling it that I'm ending my statement, or I'm ending the line or the command, and telling it to go to the next line. That's basically what that's all about. So if you notice that here, and then you have the brackets. The brackets is encapsulation. It's telling it that there's a sub procedure or sub command or something further defined inside. I hope that's a good explanation. So let's go ahead and run this now, and we'll see what happens. So effectively, we have typed "Hello World," and it's waiting on us to read the line. So if you press the enter key, it'll exit. Let's go back to our syllabus to see where we're at in the syllabus. Okay. So we kind of skipped down to the project "Hello World," which is fine. We didn't go over this stuff because we didn't do a win form. So let's kind of go back to that real quick, because we can do that. So go into your Solution Explorer, right-click Add, and I don't know if we can do it. Oh, yes, you can. So over here, there's a Windows forum. We're going to go ahead and add one. We're not going to actually use it, but we'll just add it just for the purpose of having it, just to go over it. The difference between console and visual. So let me know when you're there, Matt.
I'm there.
Okay. So this is a Windows forum. form is different than a console because now we can actually use the toolbox. So go ahead and click on your toolbox and let me know when you get there. Are you seeing any controls pop up?
Yes, but
Okay.
not the ones in general that I was trying to add earlier.
Right, that's fine. Um, but you have controls popping up now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I want to go over some basic controls. Some of the most common controls that you're going to use. We're going to start with button. So to use one of these controls, you just simply click on it. You can right click, copy, or you can literally just drag it onto your application and just drag it around wherever you want it. So we'll go ahead and start with a button. And then, you remember how we had a properties for our solution? We also have properties for our user controls, or for our controls, I mean. So we have some options here. We can view code, bring to the front, send to the back, align to grid. You know, we have all these options here. Some of them are grayed out and some of them are not. So let's go ahead and talk about properties because this is where you're going to spend a majority of your time. When you load this up for the first time, you're not going to be in this view. You're probably going to be in this view. So it's going to be different. So what's the difference? This is alphabetical. See how that's alphabetical? It's categorized and it's alphabetical. I like just plain alphabetical and not going by the categories. The reason is because the first thing I always do, I just go down this list right here. First thing I do is I change my button name. Probably change the back color. I may change the background image. You change if it's stretch, center, whatever. Just gonna play around with that for a second. You can even change your cursor. You can dock it. We'll go into docking later on. You can change the appearance. You can change the style. You can change your font of the text in the button. You can change how your image aligns. You can change also how your text aligns down here. Like right here is where you change how the text aligns. So basically you have a lot of options that you can play with here. So let's change the button's text. Let's just simply say click here. So we're gonna go ahead and close out our property. And as you see, I've done a few things here so far. I changed the text. So it says the click here. And I also changed my background color. So we can change that back. I believe. I thought it was control. Doesn't matter. Just change it to whatever color you like. Control light is fine. So we have a button though. Now we have a button. We actually have an actual graphical, visual object that we can use, or a control rather, that we can play around with. So that's a button. Other things that you might want to use, that you're going to commonly use, would be a label. So let's go back into our button. Let's change the properties. I'm going to take away the name. So now you have no visual key as to what this button is. So now you just have this button here. And then we have a label. Well, let's give that button an indication. So we'll call it Click Me. as the label. So now we know that that is probably indicating that this is the click me button. How do we know that? Because if we have a label right here. Does that make sense, Matt? Get that far?
Yeah.
Okay. Next thing I'll go over is a checkbox real quick. So I'm sure that you've seen these before in applications, right?
Yeah.
Or something like yes, no per checkbox. You know, like, so you can check this box yes or no. So that's a checkbox. That's another common control that you'll use. Another one is a combo box. So a combo box is actually really nice because you can go in here where it says items and collection. You can click on this. You can just say so you can add all these different options into your your drop down box. So let's say we want to see these real quick. So we go back into our solutions properties. You remember how before we just had that? So we should be able to have a form. Let's try rebuilding. So go up here to build and try rebuilding. They should give us the option now to where we can choose. I'll switch it over to a Windows application. Nope, that didn't work. It's probably because we set it as initially as a console application, so it's not going to let us go in there. But I actually have a little trick for us so we can actually see our Form 1. So what we can do is we can get rid of all this. And I'm lazy, so I'm going to go look at another application real quick to grab my code. So I'm going to go grab the syntax for that, or the command rather, to load up a form, because I don't feel like Googling it and I don't memorize a lot of stuff. A lot of people could say that that's bad to not memorize stuff, but it's kind of a good thing, in my opinion. Okay, here we go. That's what I was looking for. So I'm going to paste this code. Obviously, we don't have that. What we do have is we have the Form 1. We can see it right there. And it has no perimeters. And we're going to tell that we're going to use Windows System Forms. Did you get that far?
Not yet. Give me a second.
Okay. So let's recap then while you're working on that, what we did. So we told the application when it starts up to run a new instance of Form 1, which is this. We created a new instance of this, or rather a new object, Form 1. That's what we're going to launch. And because we originally created this as a console application, we need to tell it to use the library system.windows.forms. So if we were to actually look at this, this is the base library.
Alright, it's
And then
It's
define further is Windows, and then find even further is the forums. So it knows how to actually work with this. So you ready to debug?
yeah.
Okay, so let's go ahead and debug. Okay, so we still get our console application in the background. Not a big deal. But now we actually have our form loading. Is your form load?
Wait. Oh, it's because I didn't set it. Okay, how do you set it to a Windows form again? Because I don't. Well, no, because I can't get the menu to actually.
So you have your form, right?
Yeah.
And then you go into your properties from Solution Explorer.
Okay.
To get into here. And this is your startup object, right, currently?
Wait. Well, the only thing showing up in properties is assembly info. Is that...
So you don't have this in your Solution Explorer?
Well, yeah, I do, but...
Okay, where it says show all files, click on that.
Oh, okay, it's in... Okay, I'm changing it now.
So now you got your startup object, right?
Yeah.
So now you switch that over to your dot program, which is this.
Yeah.
Okay. So now it knows to point to here.
How do I... Okay, let's change to Windows application, but how do I...
So just simply console application. Did you set this up originally as a Windows application?
No, I had it set to console application, and I thought you were supposed to change it to Windows application.
No, we're still on a console app.
Okay.
So now you got it switched over to a console app, right? It's console
Yeah.
application.
And then how do I... And then how do I exit from that menu?
The X right here. But you got the startup object to set to your startup program, right? Your program class.
Yeah.
Okay, so just close that out. And then you have this in your program class, right? You have this line right here that says application.run.
Yeah.
You're telling it to run this. So you're going to debug. Did you get that far?
Hang on.
So I'm kind of skipping around a little bit, so I apologize.
Wait, no, I don't have... Okay, what was the line for the
code?
application.run?
Yeah. So that's
Okay.
that's basically a command. When we were talking about procedural, this is basically a command you're telling it to run.
Okay.
And you're wanting to build this instance.
And now it's working.
So now you're at this point?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have our 1, 2, 3, 4 controls here. Do you have all those controls?
Yeah.
So this is our combo box where we have like a drop down. So this is just like a drop down. Really basic, and I hard coded all these values if you remember correctly. Just like this ones are labeled to click me for our button that does nothing. And then here's our checkbox, our yes no checkbox. You got that?
Yeah.
So these are controls, visual controls. Visual meaning that they're visual, controls meaning that they're a control. They do something, they have functionality. So you can close that out. And that's a Windows forum. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of our forum because we don't need it anymore. It was more or less just for an explanation of the toolbox. And we'll come back to that later. So, effectively, let's go back to our syllabus real quickly to see if we're back on track here. I think we're pretty much done. So effectively, the only thing we haven't talked about is a picture box, but I think you kind of get the idea behind a picture box and a text box. It's pretty much pretty self-explanatory. It's just another control that you can play with on a Windows forum. But for now, this pretty much concludes the introduction. So let's go ahead and recap. So tell me what I need to type here. To get this to say, hello world, what do I need to do?
Console dot write line, and then parentheses, quotations, and then just the string that you want to put in. So in this case, hello world.
Okay, and then I need to tell it to end the line, right? And then to make it pause so we can actually read it, what do we need to do?
Console dot read line.
Okay, so let's go ahead and test that to make sure this is going to work. And you are correct, sir. Very good job. So one more thing I'm going to do. I'm going to show you, for the purpose of debugging, is I'm going to show you how to set breakpoints. So to demonstrate a breakpoint, we're going to create a string called test, and we're going to hard code the value hello. And then we're going to tell it console, whoops, dot write we're going to tell it to write that test value. By the way, C# is case sensitive, so if you're like me and you don't always type it correctly, go ahead and make that a private. Oh yeah, it's non-static. Let's go ahead and move this down into here so we can manipulate it. There we go. So there's our value. We're going to do console read line, so it'll pause. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to change that test value to equal goodbye. And we're going to write that console line again. Okay, do we have that?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and debug first so we can see how it looks like cycling through, and then we're going to set breakpoints. So the first thing we see is the word hello. So go ahead and press enter, and now it's going to type goodbye. Did you get that?
Wait, hold on.
Is that working?
Oh, I put the string declaration in the wrong place. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, it's a static, so you got to put it inside of the sub procedure.
Okay, yeah, it's working now.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and exit. that. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to set breakpoints. So in order to set a breakpoint, we'll go over what that is in just a second. See where this is? See where that bracket is? So go directly to the left of that and click just on the outside, like over here in this gray strip. Do you see how, like, when I move over here, like my pointer turns inward, and if I come over here, my pointer turns outward?
Yeah.
So where my pointer turns outward is where I want to click. Do you have a red dot?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's called a breakpoint. What that's going to do is when we run the application in, once it hits that point, it's going to stop. It's going to pause until we tell it to run or tell it to step through. And we'll go over what both of those mean in just a second. So we're going to go ahead and debug. And instantly it stops. Do you get that?
Yeah.
Okay, so to step through, you can either come up here where it says show next statement, which I don't recommend that because nobody does that. Or you can press F10. So press F10 once. See how it stepped to the next statement?
Yeah.
Or show next statement? So currently, if you hover over test, it says null. If you're not familiar with what null means unknown. Meaning it has no idea what the value is. It may or may not have a value. It simply does not know. It's an unknown value, is what it's telling you. You see null a lot in databases. We'll see it later on. We'll see it a lot as well. We'll actually use null. And right now this is null because you've declared this variable, but it has no value. You have not set the value. And that's actually what we're getting ready to do, is we're getting ready to set that variable. Its value, as you can see in this statement. So press F10 again, and if you hover back over test, do you see how it actually has the value hello? Do you see that? So now it's actually assigned that value to that variable. So now it actually has a value. And if you look, we also have this little yellow arrow that keeps following to the next line. It's telling us what line the application's at. So when we're debugging, we can check our variable's value. So it currently is hello. So let's go ahead and press F10 again, and it should come down to the read line. And if you press it one more time, I believe it should show you the screen. So get to this point and let me know.
Yeah.
Okay, press your enter key. And now we're still debugging, so it came into the next step for us. So if you hover over test, do you see how it says hello still? Even though the statement says goodbye. So that's telling us that it hasn't executed this line yet. And that's how we know. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So press F10 again. We hover over it, now it says goodbye. So when you hover over that variable, it's going to tell you, when you're debugging, it's going to tell you what that variable's value is. Now, right now we're doing a very, very simple project. So it's pretty easy to kind of figure out, you know, what that variable equals. But as our projects get more complex, when we debug, we're going to need to know what those variables are to find code when it breaks and things of that nature, so we can find our mistakes. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So this is a very valuable skill, learning how to debug. So go ahead and press F10, F10. You're there. And I believe F5 will just go ahead and run the rest of the application. Yes. So you'll get used to memorizing the keys, you know, the shortcuts. And F11 will actually step into things as well. But but that's a different kind of step. And we'll talk about that later as we make more complex applications. But for now, this is pretty much our very first, I don't want to say application because it's not technically an application. This is our very first project or solution. So we'll work on this some more in our next session next week. So anything you wanna share, or anything that you think you want to share that you took away from this session?
I don't know, not really anything I can think of. I don't know. I mean,
Because I knew you're coming into this with already like a good programming background already. So were there some things that you learned?
well, I mean, coming from someone that, my computer science teacher would always make me, or would just make the class, like dry run our programs by hand. So so breakpoints seem really useful so far.
Okay. So and then is this relate like to your experience with GML as well? Is this fairly similar?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So it makes sense.
yeah.
Okay. Great. So we're gonna to save our application. I always click the save all. Now there is a difference. The save right here will only save what's selected. Okay? So that would only save this tab. If you save all, if you had multiple tabs open, which eventually we will, it will save all of them instead of just the one that you have selected. So I always click save all. And we're going to go ahead and save this as my first project. So go ahead and click save. And you want to create a directory for this solution. You can put it anywhere you want, but I recommend keeping them all in the default location. So go ahead and click save. And it should be almost instant because it's a console application and it's really small.
Yeah.
All right, so did you get that?
Yeah.
All right, cool. If you have any questions, obviously just email me your questions. But anyway, Thursday, 8 o'clock next week work for you as well, again?
Yeah.
Okay. And then I'll update the syllabus. And anybody watching this who needs a copy of the syllabus as well, reach out to me or leave me a comment and with your email address, and I'll just send you a copy, or I can post a link and they can download the syllabus. And it'll be updated as we go. So that's pretty much it. Thanks, Matt.
You're welcome.